They called her foolish and said she was signing her own death warrant. In the power corridors of Manhattan Divorce Court, you don't go toe-to-toe with a billionaire tech mogul without a legal army, especially when he's assembled the most ruthless legal team money can buy. Everyone in courtroom 7 expected a bloodbath. They expected Diana Thompson to stammer, crumble, and crawl away with whatever scraps her husband decided to throw her. Jamie certainly did. He laughed out loud when she rose to speak. But he forgot one crucial thing. The woman he dismissed as a trophy wife had spent 15 years as a forensic accountant. And for the past 3 years, while he was building his empire on fraud, she was quietly documenting every lie, every hidden account, every stolen dollar. What happened over the next 4 hours didn't just silence his laughter. It brought the FBI through the courtroom doors, exposed a criminal conspiracy worth hundreds of millions, and unearthed a secret so devastating it connected to a death Jamie thought he'd buried forever. This is the story of the wife they all underestimated, who walked into that courtroom not as a victim, but as the executioner. Before we proceed, make sure you're subscribed, because the twists in this story, they come fast, and they cut deep. Now, let's step into it. The laughter wasn't subtle. It was a rich, condescending sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls of the New York County Supreme Court, courtroom 7. It was the sound of a man who had never faced consequences in his entire life. Jamie Dawson leaned back in his chair, absently straightening the cuff of his $4,000 bespoke suit. He turned to his attorney, Arthur Vance, a man known in legal circles as the Predator of Park Avenue, and whispered loud enough for half the room to hear. "Look at her, Arthur. Standing there with her little laptop like she's about to give a TED Talk. This is actually embarrassing. I almost feel bad for her." Arthur Vance, a man with perfectly coiffed silver hair and eyes like cold steel, didn't laugh. He just smiled, thin, sharp, clinical. He tapped his gold fountain pen against the heavy oak table with meticulous rhythm. "Let her play attorney, Jamie. It makes the destruction more efficient. Judge Hayes has zero patience for amateurs. She'll be in contempt before the lunch recess." Across the aisle at the plaintiff's table sat Diana Thompson. She looked almost out of place. The courtroom's aggressive air conditioning made her pull her blazer a bit tighter around her shoulders. Unlike the defense table, which was a war room of 3 junior associates, laptops humming, stacks of leather-bound folders, and wireless printers on standby, Diana's table was nearly empty. Just an encrypted laptop, a single yellow legal pad, and a glass of water she hadn't touched. She wore a simple but sharp-tailored suit, her hair pulled back in a neat professional style. She kept her gaze forward, calm, controlled. To the casual observer, she looked like a woman already defeated, a former analyst who'd left her career behind, now facing the empire she'd helped build being used to crush her. "All rise," the bailiff commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Judge Eleanor Hayes entered like a storm front, a tall, formidable black woman in her late 50s whose reputation for no-nonsense jurisprudence had made her both feared and respected. She took her seat with a kind of deliberate authority that silenced even the whispers in the gallery. Her dark eyes swept the courtroom once, lingering for just a fraction of a second on Diana, before she spoke. "We're here for the dissolution of marriage between Diana Green Thompson and Jamie Dawson. Mr. Vance, you may proceed with your opening statement." Arthur Vance rose with the fluid confidence of a man who delivered this performance 100 times before. He buttoned his suit jacket with theatrical precision and turned to face the judge, though his words were clearly aimed at the journalists scribbling in the back rows. "Your Honor, this case is as straightforward as it is unfortunate. My client, Mr. Dawson, is a visionary entrepreneur who built Dawson Global from nothing into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. The respondent," he gestured dismissively toward Diana without looking at her, "is a woman who, tragically, has allowed bitterness and paranoia to cloud her judgment. Mrs. Thompson has concocted elaborate fantasies about hidden assets and corporate malfeasance, stories she's apparently convinced herself are real despite having zero evidence, zero expertise, and frankly, Your Honor, a documented history of emotional instability that required professional intervention." A few reporters shifted in their seats. Jamie's expression remained neutral, but there was a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. Vance continued, his voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. We ask the court to see this for what it is, a desperate attempt by an angry housewife to extract more than she's entitled to from a man whose only crime was building something extraordinary. The defense is prepared to demonstrate that every asset is properly disclosed, every transaction legitimate, and that Mrs. Thompson's decision to represent herself is simply the latest manifestation of her refusal to accept reality. He sat down with a satisfied nod toward Jamie. Judge Hayes turned her gaze to Diana. Mrs. Thompson, your opening statement. Diana stood slowly. For a moment, she simply stood there, looking smaller than ever next to her nearly empty table. Her hands rested lightly on the laptop in front of her. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried. Your Honor, my husband is correct about one thing. He did build something extraordinary. She paused, her fingers moving to open the laptop. He built a criminal empire worth $2.4 billion that exists entirely in the shadows. I know this because I'm going to show you exactly where it is. The courtroom went still. Diana's fingers moved across the keyboard. I've been using a custom forensic application, one I designed myself during my years as a data analyst, to trace every illicit transaction, every hidden transfer, every fraudulent account. What I've found is a digital ghost, Your Honor. A cryptocurrency wallet that doesn't officially exist in any of the disclosed financial documents. My husband calls it his insurance policy. She looked up, meeting Jamie's eyes for the first time. His face had gone white. I call it what it is. The Phantom Wallet. And I'm about to make it very, very real. Arthur Vance's pen stopped moving. Arthur Vance recovered quickly, as predators do. He called his first witness with renewed confidence, clearly believing Diana's dramatic opening was nothing but smoke and mirrors that would dissipate under the weight of expert testimony. The defense calls Dr. Marcus Chun, Chief Technology Officer of Dawson Global. A slim Asian man in his early 40s walked to the stand, his movements careful and measured. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and a perfectly pressed button-down shirt under a gray blazer. Marcus Chun had been with Dawson Global since the beginning, one of the original architects of the platform that had made Jamie a billionaire. He'd also been Diana's colleague once, back when she'd been part of the security team, before Jamie convinced her that staying home was better for the family they'd build together. Vance led Chun through a carefully choreographed series of questions establishing his credentials, the company's transparent business practices, and the supposedly legitimate revenue streams. Chun answered each question with the polished ease of someone who'd been media-trained to within an inch of his life. So to be clear, Dr. Chun, Vance concluded with a satisfied smile, Dawson Global's data collection practices are fully compliant with all applicable privacy laws and disclosed in the terms of service. Correct. Absolutely correct, Chun said, nodding earnestly. Your witness, Mrs. Thompson, Judge Hayes said, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. Diana stood and walked around her table, carrying nothing but a single piece of paper. She stopped a few feet from the witness stand, and for a long moment, she just looked at Marcus Chun. He shifted slightly in his seat. Dr. Chun, do you remember the dev test environment? Chun blinked. I'm sorry. The dev test backdoor. The one we built in 2015 for quality assurance testing. It was supposed to be temporary, removed after the Series B funding round. Diana's voice remained calm, almost conversational. Do you remember it? Chen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was deprecated years ago. Was it? Diana tilted her head slightly. Because according to the server logs I pulled 3 weeks ago, logs I had legal access to as a 50% shareholder in the marital estate, the dev test environment is still active. In fact, it's been running continuously for the past 8 years, processing approximately 14 million user data requests per month. The color drained from Chen's face. Diana took a step closer. That backdoor was designed to bypass user consent protocols, wasn't it, Dr. Chen? It was built so we could test features without triggering privacy notifications. And you never shut it down. Instead, you've been using it to scrape personal data, messages, locations, contact lists, search histories, and selling the data to third-party political consulting firms in direct violation of both federal privacy law and your own terms of service. That's not, Chen stammered. You've made over $340 million from these illegal data sales in the last 3 years alone. I have the wire transfers. I have the client lists. I have the API calls. Diana's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. Who authorized the continued use of the dev test environment for commercial data harvesting, Dr. Chen? Was it you, or was it Jamie? Chen looked desperately toward the defense table. Jamie's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. Arthur Vance was already on his feet. Your Honor, my client wishes to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hayes slammed her gavel 3 times, the sharp cracks cutting through the chaos like gunshots. Order. I will have order in this courtroom, or I will clear the gallery entirely. The murmurs subsided, but the energy had fundamentally shifted. The journalists were no longer bored. They were leaning forward, phones discreetly angled to capture every moment. Jamie's legal team huddled in urgent whispered conference, while Diana returned calmly to her table. Arthur Vance stood, attempting to regain control of the narrative. Your Honor, the defense moves to strike the witness's invocation of constitutional protections from the record as prejudicial and... Motion denied, Judge Hayes said flatly. Mrs. Thompson, do you have additional evidence you wish to present? I do, Your Honor. Diana opened her laptop and tapped several keys. I'd like to submit Exhibit B into evidence. A court clerk approached and took the USB drive Diana offered, loading the documents onto the courtroom's display screens. A spreadsheet appeared, rows of transactions highlighted in yellow, each one meticulously labeled and cross-referenced. This is a ledger, Diana began, her voice steady and clear, from an account registered under the name Meridian Holdings LLC, a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. This corporation has no employees, no offices, no business operations of any kind. It exists solely to move money. Specifically, money from the phantom wallet I mentioned in my opening statement. She clicked to the next slide. A yacht appeared on screen, sleek, obscenely expensive, gleaming white against impossibly blue water. The name painted on its hull was clearly visible, the Alibi. On March 14th of last year, Meridian Holdings LLC transferred exactly $10 million to Oceanic Luxury Vessels in Fort Lauderdale for the purchase of this 120-foot yacht. The money came directly from a cryptocurrency wallet that appears nowhere in the financial disclosures my husband provided to this court. Jamie's sister, seated in the second row of the gallery, had gone very pale. Diana advanced to the next document. What makes this particularly interesting, Your Honor, is that the yacht isn't registered to my husband. It's registered to Vanessa Dawson, Jamie's sister, who has never been employed by Dawson Global, has no disclosed income exceeding $80,000 per year, and somehow managed to acquire a $10 million yacht. Diana's eyes found Vanessa in the crowd. The registration documents were filed 6 weeks after Jamie and I separated. The timing is remarkable. Arthur Vance was on his feet. Your Honor, Miss Dawson is not a party to these proceedings and... Miss Dawson is a vessel for asset dissipation, Diana interrupted, her voice cutting clean through Vance's objection. My husband knew I'd be entitled to half of the marital estate, so he began systematically hiding assets using his sister as a proxy. The phantom wallet funded the purchase. The wire transfer occurred 3 business days after I filed for divorce. And if you look at transaction 47 on the spreadsheet, you'll see another $3.2 million transferred from the same source to a property management company in Turks and Caicos, a beachfront villa also registered in Vanessa's name, purchased 2 months ago. Judge Hayes leaned forward, studying the documents on her screen with the intensity of a surgeon examining an X-ray. "Mrs. Thompson, how did you obtain these records?" Diana smiled thinly. "My husband never changed the master password to his cloud storage, Your Honor. He didn't think I was paying attention." The lunch recess came and went like a held breath. When court reconvened, Arthur Vance had the look of a man who decided to burn everything to the ground. If he couldn't win on facts, he'd win on character assassination. It was, after all, what he did best. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice taking on a tone of grave concern, "before we proceed further, the defense must address a critical issue regarding Mrs. Thompson's credibility and mental fitness to participate in these proceedings." Diana's hands stilled on her keyboard. She'd been expecting this. She'd known it was coming. That didn't make it hurt less. Vance lifted a document bound in blue backing. "I have here a sworn affidavit from Dr. Leonard Carmichael, Chief of Psychiatry at the Aura Mental Health Center in White Plains. Dr. Carmichael is a board-certified psychiatrist with over 30 years of clinical experience." He paused for effect, letting the weight of those credentials settle over the room. Dr. Carmichael treated Mrs. Thompson during her involuntary commitment to his facility from August 12 through August 29 of last year. The gallery erupted in whispers. Several journalists frantically typed on their phones. Diana sat perfectly still, her face carefully neutral, but her knuckles had gone white where she gripped the edge of the table. "According to Dr. Carmichael's professional assessment," Vance continued, walking slowly toward the bench, "Mrs. Thompson exhibited severe paranoid ideation, including elaborate conspiratorial beliefs about her husband, claims of being surveilled, and persistent delusions regarding hidden financial crimes that had no basis in reality. She was deemed a danger to herself and others, Your Honor. She required sedation on multiple occasions." Jamie leaned back in his chair, a small satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This was the kill shot. This was the moment Diana's entire case would collapse under the weight of her own supposed instability. Vance placed the affidavit on the clerk's desk. "Dr. Carmichael's clinical notes describe a woman who has constructed an entire alternate reality to cope with the trauma of her failing marriage. The so-called evidence she's presented today, these phantom wallets, these conspiracy theories about data harvesting, they are textbook examples of the same paranoid delusions that required her institutionalization. She is not a whistleblower, Your Honor. She is a deeply troubled woman who needs help, not a courtroom platform for her fantasies." He turned to face Diana directly, his expression almost pitying. "We ask the court to order a current psychiatric evaluation before allowing Mrs. Thompson to continue making wild accusations that damage my client's reputation and waste this court's valuable time. No one here wants to cause her further harm, but we cannot allow untreated mental illness to be weaponized in a legal proceeding." Judge Hayes looked at Diana, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Thompson, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Diana stood slowly. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but absolutely steady. "I do, Your Honor. And I have video evidence that will show exactly why I was committed, and who paid to keep me there." Diana's fingers moved across her laptop with practiced precision. Within seconds, a video file loaded onto the courtroom displays. The image quality was poor, grainy, low-resolution footage from what appeared to be a security camera mounted in the corner of an institutional hallway. The timestamp read August 19th, 11:47 p.m. "This is surveillance footage from the administrative wing of the Aura Mental Health Center," Diana said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Specifically, the hallway outside Dr. Carmichael's private office." The video showed two figures entering the frame. Even through the poor resolution, Jamie Dawson was unmistakable, his expensive casual wear and confident stride visible even in the dim corridor lighting. Beside him walked Dr. Leonard Carmichael himself, distinguished and silver-haired, dressed in slacks and a cardigan despite the late hour. Arthur Vance was already on his feet. "Your Honor, this is clearly inadmissible. Mrs. Thompson could not have had legal access to. The footage was provided to me by a nurse who witnessed what happened next," Diana interrupted calmly. "She downloaded it from the facility's archive before it could be deleted. She's prepared to testify under oath if necessary." On screen, Jamie and Dr. Carmichael stopped outside the office door. Jamie reached into his jacket and pulled out what was unmistakably an envelope. Even without audio, his body language was clear, The casual way he handed it over, the conspiratorial lean-in, the self-satisfied smile. Dr. Carmichael hesitated for only a moment before taking the envelope. He opened it partially, just enough to glimpse inside. His head nodded slowly. That envelope, Diana continued, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside, contained $50,000 in cash. I know this because the nurse, Miranda Hodges, who'd been working there for 12 years, found the deposit slip Dr. Carmichael carelessly left in his office trash 2 days later. He deposited exactly $50,000 into his personal account on August 21st. The video continued. Jamie said something, gestured back down the hallway, presumably toward the patient wing where Diana had been held. Dr. Carmichael nodded again, more firmly this time. They shook hands. The transaction was complete. Diana advanced to the next exhibit. This is my medical file from Aura. You'll notice that on August 20th, the day after this meeting, Dr. Carmichael updated my treatment plan to extend my involuntary hold for an additional 2 weeks, citing persistent delusional symptoms despite the fact that my previous 3 days of evaluations had shown significant improvement. She pulled up another document. And this is an email I sent to Jamie on August 11th, 1 day before I was committed. In it, I told him I'd discovered discrepancies in Dawson Global's financial reports. I told him I knew about the offshore accounts. I told him I was going to the SEC if he didn't come clean. Diana looked directly at Jamie. His confident smile had vanished. I was committed 12 hours later, she said quietly. Called in by an anonymous tip claiming I was suicidal. The police who responded found me perfectly calm, but they took me anyway. And once Dr. Carmichael had been paid, I stayed locked in that facility for 18 days while my husband systematically moved assets I couldn't access or monitor. Judge Hayes's expression had turned to stone. Judge Hayes removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly, deliberately. When she put them back on, her gaze could have cut glass. Mr. Vance, does your client wish to address these allegations before we proceed? Arthur Vance looked like a man watching his carefully constructed tower collapse floor by floor. Your Honor, we would need time to verify the authenticity of this footage and... I'm sure you would, Judge Hayes said icily. Mrs. Thompson, do you have additional evidence to present? I do, Your Honor. Diana's hands were steadier now. The worst was over. The shame Jamie had tried to weaponize against her was now exposed as the crime it actually was. I'd like to submit Exhibit D. A new spreadsheet populated the screens, but this one was different. It was color-coded cross-referenced, with dates and times aligned in parallel columns that told an unmistakable story. This is a comprehensive log of every stock trade Jamie made through his personal brokerage account over the past 3 years, Diana explained. The left column shows the date and time of each trade. The right column shows internal Dawson Global communications, emails, Slack messages, board meeting minutes, that contained material, non-public information about company performance, upcoming partnerships, or product launches. She highlighted the first row. On January 14th, at 9:47 a.m., Jamie received an email from the CFO marked confidential detailing that Dawson Global's Q4 earnings would miss projections by 18% due to a failed acquisition. At 10:23 a.m., 36 minutes later, Jamie sold 200,000 shares of company stock through a shell brokerage account registered in the Cayman Islands. The stock price dropped 42% when earnings were announced 3 days later. Jamie avoided $8.4 million in losses. Arthur Vance's face had gone gray. Diana scrolled down. On March 3rd, Jamie attended a closed-door board meeting where they discussed a pending partnership with a major automotive manufacturer, information that would have sent the stock soaring. At 2:15 p.m. that same day, before the partnership was publicly announced, Jamie purchased 500,000 shares through the same shell account. When the news broke a week later, he made $12.7 million. Row after row, the pattern was undeniable. Internal information, followed within hours by precisely timed trades. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't luck. It was textbook insider trading, executed with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. Over 36 months, Diana continued, her voice gaining strength, Jamie made 73 trades based on material non-public information. His total profit from these illegal transactions exceeds $89 million. Every single trade is documented here, the source of the information, the timing of a transaction, and the profit realized. She looked up at Judge Hayes. This isn't a marital dispute anymore, Your Honor. This is securities fraud on a massive scale. The judge was already reaching for her phone. We're in recess. Bailiff, no one leaves this courtroom. She pressed a button on her desk. Get me the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Immediately. Jamie Dawson, for the first time since the proceedings began, looked genuinely afraid. The recess lasted 45 minutes. When Judge Hayes returned, she was flanked by 4 federal agents, 2 from the FBI, 2 from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They took positions along the back wall, their presence transforming the courtroom from a civil proceeding into something far more serious. Jamie kept glancing back at them, his expensive attorney whispering urgently in his ear. "We will continue," Judge Hayes announced. "Mrs. Thompson, you may proceed." Diana stood, and this time there was no hesitation, no tremor in her voice. She'd carried this weight for 15 years. She was finally going to set it down. "Your Honor, I need to enter one final piece of evidence." "Exhibite." She pulled up a document that looked ancient compared to the sleek spreadsheets and modern bank statements. A scanned image of a paper receipt, slightly yellowed, dated June 2009. This is a payment receipt from an escrow account held by Whitman and Associates, a now-defunct legal firm that specialized in what they called witness management. She zoomed in on the amount, $175,000. On June 18, 2009, this payment was made to a man named Gerald Hastings. Mr. Hastings was the sole witness in a corporate espionage case against my father, Marcus Green. My father was an activist and tech entrepreneur who'd built a small but successful data privacy startup. He was outspoken about corporate overreach, about the dangers of unchecked data collection. Diana's voice remained steady, but her eyes had become hard as diamonds. Mr. Hastings testified that my father had stolen proprietary code from a competitor. Based solely on his testimony, my father was convicted, lost everything, and spent 3 years in federal prison. He died 2 months after his release. The conviction destroyed him. She advanced to the next slide, a wire transfer record. This is a transaction from the Phantom Wallet, dated June 15, 2009. 3 days before the payment to Gerald Hastings. The amount, $175,000. The destination, Whitman and Associates escrow account. The courtroom had gone absolutely silent. Jamie was 26 years old in 2009, already running a venture capital fund with family money. My father's privacy startup was disrupting the same data harvesting industry Jamie was heavily invested in. So Jamie paid to have my father destroyed. He bought false testimony, orchestrated a wrongful conviction, and eliminated a competitor who threatened his future empire. Arthur Vance shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is absolutely... You self-righteous bitch." Jamie's roar cut through the courtroom like a thunderclap. He lunged to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "Your father was a sanctimonious nobody who thought he could lecture the rest of us about ethics. He was in the way. He deserved..." He stopped, suddenly aware of the silence, the stares, the federal agents now moving forward. "Mr. Dawson," one of the FBI agents said calmly, "you need to come with us." "On what charges?" Arthur Vance demanded, though his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. "Wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and witness tampering in a federal case," the agent replied, pulling out handcuffs. "For now." Jamie's eyes found Diana's across the courtroom. There was no laughter now. Only the dawning realization that he'd been outplayed from the very beginning. The arrest happened quickly, almost anticlimactically. Jamie was read his rights in the same courtroom where he'd laughed at Diana just hours earlier. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Arthur Vance stood frozen, his gold fountain pen still clutched uselessly in his hand, watching his client being led away by federal agents. But Diana wasn't watching Jamie. Her eyes were locked on something else entirely, the Italian leather briefcase sitting abandoned on the defense table. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I'd like to request that Mr. Dawson's personal effects be secured as evidence before they're removed from the courtroom." Judge Hayes nodded to the bailiff. "Make sure everything on that table is photographed and catalogued." "Specifically the briefcase," Diana added, stepping forward. "I believe it contains additional evidence relevant to the conspiracy charges." Arthur Vance finally found his voice. "Your Honor, that briefcase contains privileged attorney-client materials and—" "The privilege doesn't extend to evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy, Mr. Vance," Judge Hayes said sharply. "Mrs. Thompson, approach." Diana walked to the defense table with the measured steps of someone who'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. She picked up the briefcase, expensive, butter-soft leather, monogrammed with Jamie's initials. She'd given it to him for their 2nd anniversary. She knew every inch of it. Her fingers found the seam along the bottom edge where the leather liner met the frame. Jamie had a habit of hiding things in plain sight, convinced that his cleverness made him invisible. She pressed gently, felt the slight give, and pulled. The liner separated, revealing a thin space between the leather and the rigid base. Inside was a small USB drive, matte black, unmarked. The bailiff photographed it in place before Diana carefully extracted it and held it up. "This is what Jamie called his insurance policy," she said. "He told me about it once years ago, when he'd had too much scotch and felt invincible. He said if anyone ever came after him, he had enough dirt on enough powerful people to bring down half of Manhattan." She handed the drive to one of the FBI agents. "It's encrypted, but the password is Ozymandias 1987, his favorite Shelley poem and his birth year. He used it for everything he thought was untouchable." The agent took the drive, produced an evidence bag, and sealed it. Within minutes, he had a laptop open, typing in the password Diana had provided. The encryption broke. Files began to populate the screen, hundreds of them, organized in folders with names like political contributions, regulatory capture, witness payments, and one labeled simply green case. The agent's expression darkened as he opened the green case folder. "Judge Hayes, you need to see this." The files told the complete story. Email chains between Jamie and a prosecutor named Richard Kellerman. Wire transfer records showing payments totaling $340,000. Scanned copies of the fabricated evidence used against Diana's father. And most damning of all, a recorded phone conversation where Jamie and Kellerman laughed about neutralizing the privacy crusader and discussed which federal prison would break him fastest. "There are at least 15 other cases documented here," the agent said quietly, scrolling through the folders. "Corporate rivals, whistleblowers, journalists. He's been doing this for over a decade." Diana closed her eyes. Her father's name was finally, truly cleared. The courtroom proceedings were suspended indefinitely. Jamie was transported to federal custody, and Judge Hayes ordered the war room files to be turned over to the U.S. Attorney's Office immediately. But Diana had made copies, perfectly legal copies, as the files were now part of the discovery in her divorce case. By midnight that same day, redacted versions had been sent to 3 major newspapers and 2 investigative journalism outlets. The story broke at dawn. By the time Arthur Vance arrived at his Park Avenue office the next morning, protesters were already gathering outside. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. 6 of his corporate clients had terminated their retainers before breakfast. His carefully constructed reputation was disintegrating in real time. Diana was waiting for him in the lobby. "We need to talk," she said simply. Vance's face was haggard, his usually immaculate silver hair disheveled. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then just listen." Diana gestured to the empty conference room nearby. 5 minutes. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps some part of him wanted to confess, but Vance followed her inside. He didn't notice when Diana set her phone face down on the table, the recording app already running. "You knew," Diana said quietly. "About my father. About all of it." Vance slumped into a chair. "I was a junior associate at Whitman back then. I wasn't the one who," he stopped, rubbed his face with both hands. "Jamie came to us with the green problem. Said we needed to make it go away. The senior partners handled the details, but I processed the payments. I knew what Gerald Hastings was being paid for. You helped destroy an innocent man. I was 28 years old and drowning in law school debt." Vance's voice cracked. "They told me it was normal, that this was how business worked at the highest levels. And then Jamie became successful, and he kept coming back to me, and suddenly I was the attorney everyone wanted because I could make problems disappear." He looked at her with hollow eyes. "I've spent 15 years covering up crimes for men like Jamie Dawson. Your father wasn't the first. He wasn't even the worst. But you kept doing it." "I kept doing it," Vance admitted. "And now it's over. My career, my reputation, everything. I hope you're satisfied." Diana picked up her phone, stopped the recording. "The FBI will want to hear this. You might want to contact a criminal defense attorney, one who specializes in cooperating witnesses." She walked out, leaving Vance sitting alone in the conference room. Federal agents arrested him 6 hours later in his office as he was frantically shredding documents. 3 months later, Diana stood at the podium in Dawson Global's main auditorium, now rebranded as the Green Digital Privacy Foundation. She'd been appointed interim CEO after Jamie's assets were frozen, and her first act had been to restructure the entire company as a nonprofit dedicated to data privacy advocacy and education. "We're announcing our first round of grants today," she told the assembled crowd of entrepreneurs, activists, and journalists. 50 startups focused on ethical technology and digital rights will receive full funding. No equity required. No strings attached. The applause was thunderous. That evening, Diana drove to Riverside Cemetery in Newark. She knelt beside a simple headstone, Marcus Isaiah Green, 1961 to 2012, beloved father and visionary. She placed fresh flowers against the granite and whispered, "I got them, Papa. Every single one of them. And I built something better from the ashes. You can rest now." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Diana stood, brushed the grass from her knees, and walked back to her car. She was no longer the silenced wife, the dismissed woman, the underestimated opponent. She was Diana Green Thompson. And she had won.